for Giovanni to get to his seat. No, we want to make sure you're nice and comfortable. All right, I'll ask the clerk to call the attendance.
Gavel it so he knows.
For today. I walked right by him.
Okay?
Counselor Brown.
Here.
Counselor Judith Garcia is absent. Counselor Teneri Garcia.
Here.
Counselor Lopez.
Here.
Counselor Robinson.
Here.
Counselor Recupero. Counselor Vito. Counselor De Jesus.
Present.
Counselor Heidelberg. Counselor Vega.
Here.
And Counselor Taylor.
Here.
10 members present, 1 absent. The Chelsea City Council will hold a meeting of the Subcommittee on Conference Thursday, December 21st at 6 p.m. to discuss the status of the proposed soccer stadium at Encore Boston Harbor and what benefits the project will bring to Chelsea. Also in attendance is State Senator Sal DiDomenico.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Actually, I requested this meeting so Senator Sal can come and give us an overview of where things are with the stadium and what our interest is in being at the table. So I'll turn it over to the senator to be able to explain to us the situation.
Thank you, President Robinson, and everyone else that's here, the councilors and the public watching in person at home. I was asked to come tonight to give an update on what is happening with the potential development where the power plant sits in the city of Everett and also a portion of the city of Boston. There's been a lot of reports in the newspaper and a lot of things on social media that have been accurate and inaccurate. And I'm here tonight to tell you what the real facts are and where we stand at the moment. So when this proposed development was brought forward, if you remember, probably about a year and a half ago, the House of Representatives put an amendment to the Economic Development Bill into, it passed, and it made it through the House, and it had several components to it. And at that point in time, they were looking at the DPA and some other public engagement processes were lifted as well. The Senate didn't concur at the time with what they did, and it did not make it out of conference committee because it was, in our mind, it was too broad. Fast forward to a few months ago, things started getting a little more traction, and as a result, I brought forward several of the environmental groups who were opposed to what happened in the House. I brought them together at the site to show them what was there, which is a dirty power plant right now. The power plant itself has been decommissioned, and what you see with the smokestacks and the building there is not an attractive gateway to any community. And the cleanup itself on that site is going to cost upwards of $60 to $70 million. $60 to $70 million before they even develop the land. So to get someone to come into a community with private investments and private dollars and come in and clean up the land at their own cost with no federal or state dollars is a big deal, I walked that site. I do not recommend any one of you all walk that site. You need a hazmat suit almost to even step foot on that property. The building itself, when you walk through it, you can see the contaminants in the air. The building is so dirty that it has to be taken down by hand because things are behind the walls, behind piping. Every contaminant you can think of is in that building and on that soil. It has been polluting the water, the air, and the land for decades. And in that part of Everett, there have been cancer clusters for many, many years as a result of this power plant doing what they did. So now we have a chance to turn the page on industrial past on the waterfront and provide a development for residents to enjoy, for the region to enjoy, and to turn a brownfield into something spectacular with public access. So I brought the environmental folks together at this meeting with the craft group environmental groups, the mayor of Everett, and representatives from the city of Everett to talk about how we could proceed and what they thought would be the best avenue. At that time, and this is important to note, at that time, the environmental groups initiated a conversation with the craft group on a memorandum of agreement. Now, it's been reported in the press that this is a host agreement for the city of Everett. That is inaccurate. There is no host agreement with the city of Everett because there is no project. At this point in time, the environmental folks wanted to have some sort of agreement in place with the crafts group before we move forward with legislation. They felt it was important to have something on paper before anything was done at the State House. They initiated that conversation, and they negotiated that agreement. The mayor did not negotiate that. The city did not negotiate that. And that's what some people are talking about in the press and saying the host agreement has already been done, there's a community agreement already in place. That is absolutely false. What is in that agreement was what the environmental folks wanted to see down on paper, and it's very good in a lot of ways. And they felt they had some leverage before an agreement was reached at the State House. So they went forward, negotiated it, and they got an agreement with the crafts group. The mayor had to sign it because it's not going to be binding unless the mayor signs it. The environmental groups can't sign something, an agreement for a community. So that being said, the agreement with the city of Everett will come in the next phase. The mayor will negotiate that at a later date. What we are doing at the State House is one simple thing. We're not taking away public process. We're not taking away Chapter 91. We're not taking away MEPA process. All we're saying is this land where the power plant is today is in a DPA, a designated port area, which means it's maritime use only. There has not been maritime use on that land in several years. And if you know the land where I'm talking about, it's where the Alpha Street Bridge is, and you can't even put a ship up against that bridge anyway. It's just not conducive for shipping. The DPA extends all the way from the Alpha Street Bridge all the way into Chelsea. It's a very big DPA, one of the biggest in the state. We're taking away a very small piece of the larger DPA, which is where the power plant sits. There are two power plants on that site. One is at the front of the Alpha Street Bridge area. Then there's another power plant beyond that. The first power plant is decommissioned, not in use. The second power plant beyond there is in use and will be decommissioned in 2024. We're not touching anything beyond the first power plant. So that other power plant that still sits there today will still be in a DPA. And will also be under the restrictions of maritime use. There'll be no change there. It is just for this small piece where the current decommissioned power plant sits that we want to lift the DPA. That is the entire bill. It's not this flashy bill. People are thinking that we're taking away all public process, that we know public engagement, that we can put a shovel in the ground tomorrow after we pass legislation to lift the DPA. Absolutely false. Absolutely false. All we're doing is this one simple step to get to the next step, which is the public process. If we don't lift the DPA, there's no process after that because there's no project. So we are trying to get to the public process by lifting a DPA. If we're not successful at the State House doing that, then you will not see a stadium on that site. And I fear we will see what we see on that site today in the next 5, 10, 15 years. A dirty power plant with smokestacks sitting on our waterfront with no public access. So, because I don't know who else would come into a community and spend $60+ million to clean up the land. That is more expensive than the casino site to clean up. The casino site was $40 million. This is $60 million. And the development that they want to bring to our community is upwards of $600 million. Now, Gillette Stadium was built for $375 million. This stadium and development around it, which is mostly the stadium itself, is $600 million. So you can see the difference over time, how much things have grown, expenses-wise, how, inflation and how expensive things have gotten. But the stadium itself will be 25,000 seats, maybe 26,000. They're going back and forth. It will be limited in parking, the proposal that they have in front of all of us. of 75 spots for parking. So there has to be a robust public, transportation infrastructure in place. That is all going to be part of the process after the DPA would be lifted. That's the MEPA process. That's Chapter 91. That's when all communities in the surrounding area get to negotiate with the developers. That's when Everett gets to negotiate with the developers. Boston. All that happens during Chapter 91 of MEPA. The mayor of Everett has some big plans for transportation, building a station across the street behind the casino, which the casino already has in their agreement to build. They're going to look at extending the Civil Line down Route 99 so it touches the stadium. They're going to have bridges from Assembly Row into the casino site, which is already paid for, which will allow people who are coming to the games and using the stadium to go to Assembly Row T-Station. Sullivan Station will also be very important. It's out right next door. And Wellington will also be there with shuttle services and a water ferry on the waterfront for other people that are coming in from different parts of Boston. So all of that has to be negotiated. There will not be any permit in place unless MEPA and Chapter 91 have been satisfied. Now, the DPA itself is important because if we don't lift the DPA, again, there's no project. But just say if they wanted to put the stadium here, where Chelsea City Hall sits, what we're doing at the State House wouldn't even be needed because we're not in a DPA. So Chapter 91 would be in effect, MEPA would be in effect. All the things that would be in effect are still going to be in effect. All we're saying is because it's a DPA, it has to be lifted to move forward. And it's not easy to lift a DPA. So we were not successful. We put it in the Senate version of our sub-budget. The House didn't concur with us. They had some questions about different things and wanted to have some more time. So the next step would be for me to file a standalone bill. A standalone bill will entail a hearing for the public, and we'll go through the committee process at that point. So it could take several months to do this. So there's always other bills that are moving at different times that we attach it to, which is what I did with the sub-budget. And some people was reporting that we try to hide this in a sub-budget. I'll just say this: if you know how government works, a sub-budget or the fiscal year budget has a lot of policy and a lot of legislation that is included in that. The migrant money, which was $250 million, was included in the sub-budget where the stadium legislation was. The contract negotiation payments for state workers was included in the sub-budget. $6 million, which I'm very proud to say, which Chelsea has been very supportive of, having SNAP benefits for our immigrants. That was in the sub-budget, $6 million for SNAP benefits for immigrants in our state. All of those things that are put in a sub-budget or fiscal year budget, it's a normal process of government. That's how you legislate. That's how you get things done. There was no hiding under the cover of darkness. I actually made this a public process by bringing everybody to the table who was against this legislation prior to this point. I went into the community and talked to folks about this. I actually talked to Green Roots as well and Chelsea about this because the waterfront is important and we're an EJ community, both Chelsea and Everett. And having a PowerPoint on our waterfront is contradictory to what EJ is all about. It's about time that EJ communities have a say in what happens on their land and their waterfront in particular, after having heavy industry polluting our land, water, and air for decades with no public access to any portion of that waterfront. Now we have a chance to do something transformational in that area. Have a private developer come in, pay for a cleanup, pay for development, open the waterfront. They want to put a 4-acre park on the waterfront with public amenities, public restrooms, and making it a real park for the general public to use of the stadium for young nonprofits and youth events. There's some housing money in there as well, community center money in there as well, all negotiated by the people in the environmental world, not by the mayor. So there'll be a chance at the next stage, if we are successful, getting a DPA lifted, for everyone to talk and provide input and to negotiate. But unless we get past the DPA, nothing's going to happen. So this is the first step. Do I call on people? I don't know how the protocol is.
I'm waiting to be acknowledgement, President.
You have a question?
I do. I really appreciate your emphasis on process and explaining that. And I appreciate that you spoke with Green Roots and these environmental justice groups. I just don't understand why we weren't privy to this sooner. I think I think it's great. You didn't mention stadium up until the very last part of everything you said. And so for a second, I'm like, oh, is the stadium thing a rumor? But it's not. And my concern is, similarly with the casino, is the adverse impact it has on our community, because we're never considered in the initial conversations. Chelsea seems to be an afterthought. And so I agree, there's a power plant there that's caused environmental issues, and we should do whatever to do to address it, but I'm assuming that the only reason why this is even being fixed is because the developer is gonna make some money. So like, I just feel a little, it almost sounds like, I understand we have to lift the DPA, I understand it's gonna have public use, I'd rather have it there than have nothing there, I get all of that. But what are we doing to ensure that Chelsea is going to be considered or involved in these conversations? Because we're the ones, you got here 15 minutes late today because traffic is so bad. No offense, but it's true, sorry, Sal. But you know, there's a lot of traffic in Boston and here, so we have something we have to vote on today that's gonna increase density even more. The concern is the impact and the quality of life it has on our residents. So how can we know that we will be considered and make a decision when we've already have been an afterthought?
Well, Chelsea hasn't been an afterthought because, you know, it's, the DPA, again, I'll say this again, there is no project and no process without lifting a DPA.
Mm-hmm.
So when you talk about public process, all of that will be in place. Again, if you wanted to build it right here, all of the public engagement processes that would be in every project in the entire state we have to go through, this project has to go through the same process. So we are not even at that stage yet, because if the DPA is not lifted, there's no room for Chelsea to talk about any of this. There's no room for even Everett to talk about this, and that's the host city, or Boston, who has a piece of this land there. The DPA is the impediment to developing anything on that waterfront.
Yeah.
Chelsea will have a big say during MEPA in Chapter 91, just as Everett would, just as Boston would. All of our communities, and not just the cities themselves, but the residents as well, will have time to comment and put their suggestions forward. So it is not, there hasn't been an engagement for the cities or towns around this project, because we're not at that stage yet.
But you said you spoke to Green Roots, so I'm like, how come, I don't know.
Because it was because the environmental folks, the DPA itself is an environmental issue. So the environmental folks are the ones that were very much opposed to lifting any kind of DPA in the entire state, not just in that piece of land. So being the environmental justice arm for the region, they were one of the groups that I reached out to in the environmental world, because I reached out to Mr. Watershed. Mr. Watershed is actually on that waterfront. Conservation Law Foundation, Boston Harbor Now, Green Roots, Everett Community Growers in Everett, which is the EJ group in Everett. Mm-hmm. Those are the people that were engaged because the DPA is an environmental issue. And if we can't get past that, then we can't get past it. Then nothing was going to move forward. So they have a large say at the State House, a large say.
Do you foresee there being any mitigation costs that Chelsea can secure because of the impact it's going to have on our community?
That's what the Chapter 91 MEPA process is all about. That's Chelsea's time to step up and say, and these are the impacts that are in our community, and we want mitigation for that. So obviously Somerville is as a neighbor, Chelsea, Boston. And I will tell you, in the MOA, the environmental groups also negotiated that job preference would go to Everett, and then Chelsea, and then Malden, the surrounding communities. But Chelsea is one of the cities listed in the MOA as getting preference for jobs.
Can you make sure to keep this council, I won't be here, but can you make sure to let the council, so they can be informed of any upcoming meetings or?
Yeah, so there'll be a hearing date for the bill, and I'll make sure that everyone in Chelsea knows there's a hearing date if they want to come in and speak on the bill. I would hope people will speak in favor of lifting the DPA on that site, because if there's no DPA lifted, then there's nothing to talk about for mitigation.
Of course.
Next steps for Chelsea. But there's also a process for Chapter 91 in MEPA, and I'll keep everybody informed about that, too.
Thank you. Thank you,
Yeah,
Senator.
the reason why I asked the senator to come, so we all can be on the same page and understand what's going on.
Thank you, Mr. President, I appreciate
With the
that.
stadium. Counsel, you have a question?
So, thank you for coming and explaining all that. I really do appreciate it, and that we all need a little bit more clarity. I think that the reaction that a lot of people have had in Chelsea, and even though if we know that the public process is yet to come, just by lifting the DPA has consequences in and of itself, which, you know, opens up a lot of economic opportunity for Everett, but it also, as a consequence, kind of solidifies our DPA kind of in place, because you can't be lifting, you know, it takes, like you said, it's a hard process to do. So there's a lot of us who are concerned about the mitigation process, because we're getting hit from a lot of different places, and you know, we're a tiny, poor community, and it seems like a lot of other communities around us aren't really stepping up to the plate on a lot of different issues. And so, you know, Chelsea's kind of in a unique situation, and so you know, we have problems getting enough state funding as it is to meet everything else. I know you've helped with some additional stuff, and we appreciate that. But in general, it's hard to get the funding when all of our people here aren't counted in the count. So that's starting us off down here when we should be up here. So anything else that comes on top of that, I think, is a real problem. And so I get what you're saying, and I appreciate it, and I appreciate the fact that you're here and explaining it so we all can be on the same page. Listen, I'm someone who, you know, the more economic activity, the better, as far as I'm concerned, okay? Especially when we're coming into a slowdown period where construction's gonna grind to a halt. That some of these projects could be all the more valuable. So I get that, and I support that. I just don't want Chelsea left behind when it comes to, you know, we've got to pay a lot of bills, and we've done a good job, I think, kind of, you know, saving up for a rainy day. We just had one with COVID, and you know, I think we need to keep that going. But we've got a lot of things that we have to fix, a lot of infrastructure problems, you know. So I'm not really saying anything that I don't think you already know. I think you do know. But for the people at home and the people in the audience, I think it's incumbent upon us to ask these questions and to try to you know, have a greater sense of understanding about the situation going forward.
Yes, so, and I agree with everything you said, including that I've worked hard for the city of Chelsea to get funding. Because I know, you know, I say at the State House all the time, and they get sick and tired of me saying this, I don't want my fair share at the State House, because we have more than our fair share of obstacles and challenges in my district. So a fair share of the rest of the pie is doesn't help me.
That's right.
I want more than my fair share.
That is
because
correct.
we have more than our fair share of issues, and we need more in Chelsea and Everett and our gateway communities in particular. And I have Everett, Chelsea, Charlestown, and Cambridge in my district now, and I can tell you that Everett and Chelsea get a very much disproportionate amount of my time and energy at the State House, because I know what is needed in this community. And not just the funding that's directly coming to this community, which the Student Opportunity Act, I wrote language in there to increase numbers for Chelsea and Everett that have been never seen in these communities before. That was a fix that I put in there to increase funding for economically disadvantaged students to get a higher rate than everyone else, because, again, we need more for those students. ARPA funding, you know what I did with that?
I did.
Bring in those federal dollars that, when Chelsea was left behind.
I think you've done
So,
this comes from the other side of the
No,
aisle.
I-
I'm giving you credit for stepping up for Chelsea. I really
oh,
do.
I want you to know that, based on my record for this community, I will never leave Chelsea behind, even in these kind of talks.
Fair enough.
That Chelsea will be there at the table as long as I am at the table. And residents of Chelsea will always have a seat at the table if they want to have a seat at the table. And the city itself will always have a seat at the table if they want a seat at the table. I will ensure that. But we also, that there'll be a time for that, because now isn't the time, because if there's no project in place, then there's nothing to negotiate. And we don't even know if this is going to happen, to be honest with you, because this is, a DPA, taking something out of DPA is going to be changed very soon. So Chelsea and all other DPAs across the state, the Coastal Zone Management Board is actually reviewing all of the regulations for DPAs. And they're going to have a report out, they say, by next summer, that will provide some sort of guide or a map towards lifting DPAs in some of these communities where they know, it's prohibited growth and economic development. But there's also a time and a place for DPAs to exist because of clean energy and shipping and bringing goods to our state. If we close all DPAs, then obviously then all of that goes away, and we don't have any way to bring all those good things on the other end to our state and to our economy. So this DPA in particular is a dead zone in the DPA. There's never going to be container ships coming in. It's not conducive for a lot of the shipping methods that we think of when we think of shipping and bringing goods to our state. So this piece of land is, and what sits on it today, honestly, you need someone, as Councilor Vido said, a rate of return for a developer that's going to invest that kind of money to clean up the land. If we had another developer, they would want public dollars for that. They would want the state to pay for it. They'd go to the state and get a brownfield grant and start the process there. Where if you have a private developer coming in, like the casino, the Monsanto site sat there vacant for decades because no one had the means to come in and clean it up and saw any kind of return on that land. So, we don't. I don't want to, go in that direction in terms of, developers need to make a return on investment, but that's where we are with a cleanup of the land. They're not going to come in and put a public park there and spend $60 million to clean up the land and say, here you go, everybody enjoy this space with put a dog park there, right? There has to be some balance of public benefit and benefit for the developer as well to make this work. The public-private partnership is real.
Brian, you had a question?
Yeah, just two quick things. I'm all for the stadium, to be honest with you. I think it's a great concept, and I'm for anything that brings it here, and I appreciate your work for Chelsea as well. My two questions, though, the more important question for me has to do with just the recognition that there actually is harm to us as the DPA, as Charlestown develops their waterfront, as East Boston. I was part of the removal of the DPA for the Atlantic Works building there, and that whole stretch of waterfront that's developed phenomenally. And so we're left with the blight, right? That's what we wind up with increasingly valuable, increasingly restricted, underdeveloped and underutilized property. So we need to see that great clean energy project that it's reserved for. We need, the positive story that the DPA is supposed to be reserved for. We need to make that happen or get rid of the DPA here as well. And the mitigation really comes in as everyone else gets to do their successful projects. That's what we need compensation for, because we're holding the bag, right? So that's actually relevant at this stage of the process right now, because we are harmed by holding that space for everyone else. That societal need, we're carrying it, right? So that's actually where I do see it as being relevant. And then just a very small point, I agree completely that mitigation is needed for the property, but there's some pretty deep pockets in the current ownership. Let's just not miss the point that, the people who polluted it have some resources, and I don't want to miss that concept in here somewhere.
You mean the folks that got up and left and walked
Power
out?
plant, yeah.
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 Yeah, well,
Chase it further.
so, I know we're in Chelsea, but I will just say, in Everett, GE, Monsanto,
Yeah.
ExxonMobil,
There's some big names
2
there.
power plants, all of them have got up and left. And left the city with no means to fight them, because they will keep tied up in court for decades. So by right, they should be cleaning up the land, but they have the law on their side because they can stall through the court process. And a city like Chelsea doesn't have Chelsea or Everett, either one of them, doesn't have the means to keep up with that. And on top of that, you're stuck with all this dirty land in places where you want to develop, but you don't have the means to clean it up unless you find a private developer to come in and clean it up. And that's where we're at. That's the nature of the beast.
In my opinion, there's got to be a way, but the more important point, I think, is the DPA. I mean, that's actually.
Yeah,
where
and
we have an interest.
the good thing is there is a process in place, because not just Chelsea, but other communities along our waterways have figured out that this is something that needs to be analyzed, explored, and rectified in a way to provide a benefit, not deter development on these DPAs, whether it be clean energy or whether it be taking a portion away for private development or public investments. But that process is underway, and this is the first time this has happened in the history of the DPA. There are 10 DPAs across the state, and there are some that are more valuable for shipping than others, and some that have carried the burden disproportionately. And Chelsea is one of those communities that has paid more than their fair share, and I believe Everett as well, with having power plants on their waterfront. We had an LNG facility. You know, if you think about LNG being shipped in, how dangerous that was for all that time. When they had to close the Tobin Bridge, when they brought, the ship was called the Matthew. My son's Matthew, so I remember the name. But the Matthew would come in monthly with a tank, with a ship full of LNG, that at one point they said that if something happened, yeah, 6 square miles, it wouldn't be there anymore. So, I agree. Everett and Chelsea and in this part of the state had disproportionately, carried a larger burden than other folks. And that's my responsibility, to make sure that Chelsea's interests are protected, not just with the stadium project, but also how the DPA develops and how we find a way to coexist in some ways where we can look at possible opportunities in a DPA to benefit the communities, not just benefit heavy industry.
At this time, I'd like to thank one quick question, because we got to get ready for 7 o'clock.
Thank you, Mr. Senator, for representing Chelsea and doing a great job. But my question is simple. Everything depends on the EPA, right? After the EPA, let's say, approves the project, right? What can actually the city of Chelsea do? The only thing, can we influence anything? Oh, that all depends on who owns the place. What can we really influence?
Yeah, so like any other project would be, again, if it was not on the waterfront and they were going to build this in this piece of land or Everett City Hall land, then you would have the same public process you would normally. So the DPA is just the first step in the next step. But Chelsea's going to have a chance to negotiate, like all surrounding communities would have a chance to negotiate with the developer. With the casino, it's a smaller project, obviously, but it's also, it should impact several areas. So there'll be a mitigation process in place, and Chapter 91 and MEPA will be available to all communities and all residents to be part of.
How far down the road is this project?
There's no project right now.
Right, but I say, if it goes, how far would it be?
What do you mean?
If the EPA approves it and then everything goes through, right?
Well, the EPA is not
What will be a time frame for this project? 10 years, 5 years?
To build it?
Yeah.
So, that's a good point, I'm glad you mentioned that. So, the reason why there's some urgency here is because, and this has been reported publicly, this part is true, the World Cup is coming to the United States in 2026. So, the stadium would not be a World Cup facility because it's too small. But it would be a place where they would have clinics and a World Cup events and all different things there. So the urgency to get this done is real, to try to have this in place by 2026. Now, does that happen? The process hasn't even begun yet. So there's a mitigation cleanup that has to be done. You cannot even get a permit unless the MIPA process, the Chapter 91 process is fulfilled. So the DPA lifting of that DPA does not mean a shovel in the ground tomorrow. There is a lengthy process after that all projects have to follow. So, you know, the press is reporting that past the DPA, they're gonna break ground the next day. I mean, lift the DPA, and it's gonna happen the next day. It's not gonna happen that way. This is not real, that's not real. We have to go through all the other processes that we would go through. So it could be a lengthy process. 2026 is very ambitious. I'm not sure we're gonna get there.
Thank you.
I once again like to thank the senator for coming to do the presentation and answer some of the concerns that we've had here in our community. Once again, thank you, Senator. Senator will always be in touch with the city of Chelsea, as he always has been.
And I'll come back if you invite me to give updates as the process goes along as well. So the first step is the ZPA, and then I can come back after that.
We certainly will.
Quick question, if I can. Is there a hearing set for the DPA to meet? Is there already a
On the
date?
bill?
Yes.
So no, there's no hearing set yet. That is, will be determined in the next couple of weeks. But I'll make sure that the president knows and he can, you know, get that out to all the members.
We can take a quick 1-minute break and get back, just so Ricky knows.